Linda, a 42-year-old woman, sat in her pristine suburban kitchen sipping a latte, scrolling through her social media feed. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped rhythmically against the screen as she sighed in frustration at the day's headlines. Another protest, she muttered under her breath, rolling her eyes. Linda carried herself with an air of entitlement, her designer coat always perfectly pressed, her blonde hair neatly tied back in a tight ponytail. Her life was curated to perfection. The sparkling SUV parked in her driveway, the spotless home she took pride in decorating, and the circle of equally judgmental friends who shared her disdain for anything, or anyone, they deemed different. Yet behind the polished exterior lay a woman deeply insecure, masking her feelings with superiority. She picked up her purse, glanced at herself in the hallway mirror, and muttered, "Time to get this over with," as she headed out the door for a quick shopping trip downtown. Across town, Marcus, a 28-year-old mechanic, wiped his hands on a grease-stained rag as he finished fixing an engine. His hands were calloused, his jeans worn, but his face held an easy smile that lit up the room. Marcus wasn't just known for his skill with machines, but for his kind and calm demeanor. Living in a modest apartment on the edge of the city, Marcus worked long hours to support his younger sister, who was in college. "You've got a good heart," his co-workers often told him, and it was true. Despite the prejudice and judgment he sometimes faced, Marcus chose to focus on the good in people. "All right, time to grab lunch," he said to himself, tucking his wallet into the back pocket of his jeans. It wasn't much, a worn leather wallet, a gift from his late father, but it was one of his most cherished possessions. He didn't know that this wallet would soon be at the center of a confrontation that would test his patience and principles. The downtown shopping district was buzzing with activity. Street performers played soft jazz on the corner, families strolled in and out of shops, and a cool autumn breeze carried the smell of freshly baked pretzels. It was a place where people of all walks of life crossed paths. Linda parked her SUV in a reserved spot right near the entrance of a luxury boutique, ignoring the glares from passers-by who saw her ignore the handicapped-only sign. "I won't be long," she thought dismissively. Meanwhile, Marcus walked into a cafe a few doors down to grab a sandwich and a coffee. He stood in line patiently, nodding politely to the barista he'd come to know over his frequent visits. Their paths crossed outside the cafe, where Marcus accidentally bumped into Linda while balancing his coffee and lunch bag. "Oh, excuse me," he said immediately, stepping back to ensure she was okay. Linda, barely looking up, sneered. "Watch where you're going." Her sharp tone turned a few heads, but Marcus simply nodded and walked on. Unbeknownst to him, as he adjusted his jacket, his wallet slipped halfway out of his pocket, catching Linda's eye. Linda's gaze locked on the wallet, her thoughts racing. It was an opportunity she couldn't resist. She didn't need the money, but something about her twisted sense of superiority pushed her to act. As Marcus turned the corner, she subtly stepped forward, reached down, and slipped the wallet into her purse. She glanced around, her heart racing, but no one seemed to notice. That was too easy, she thought with a smirk, heading into a nearby boutique as if nothing had happened. Marcus, meanwhile, continued on his way, unaware that his most valuable possession was gone. Marcus sat on a park bench, unwrapping his sandwich and taking a sip of his coffee. As he reached for his wallet to pull out a small photo of his sister, an old habit whenever he took a break, his hand met an empty pocket. He frowned, checking his other pockets and the bag he carried. Panic set in. His wallet wasn't just about the cash inside. It held his ID, a sentimental photo of his late father, and a note from his sister that he carried for good luck. "No, no, no," Marcus muttered under his breath, standing up and checking around the bench. He retraced his steps, scanning the ground carefully. A passerby noticed him pacing and asked, "You lose something, man?" Marcus nodded, his voice tinged with urgency. "Yeah, my wallet. It must have fallen out somewhere between the cafe and here." Linda, meanwhile, sat in the boutique, casually flipping through racks of designer handbags, her purse resting comfortably on her lap. The wallet inside felt like a trophy, a moment of control she didn't realize she craved. As she browsed, she opened the wallet discreetly, glancing at its contents. Typical, she thought, noting the small amount of cash and well-worn cards. She chuckled softly, tossing it back into her purse without a second thought. She felt untouchable, convinced no one had seen her. She considered leaving the wallet somewhere later, but for now, it was a small, guilty pleasure she wasn't ready to give up. Marcus returned to the cafe, his heart pounding as he approached the barista. "Hey, Maria, did you happen to see a wallet? I think I dropped it." Maria shook her head sympathetically. "No, I didn't see one, but I can ask around." She called out to a few of the staff in the back, but no one had noticed a wallet lying around. "Let me check the security cameras," Maria suggested, stepping aside to make a call. Marcus nodded, grateful but anxious. As he waited, a thought crossed his mind. Could someone have taken it? His heart sank. He hated thinking the worst of people, but the possibility gnawed at him. Just as Marcus was about to leave, an older man sitting near the cafe entrance called out, "Hey, son, you looking for something?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, walking over. "I think I lost my wallet." The man scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I saw a woman bump into you earlier. Blonde lady, fancy coat. After you walked off, she bent down, and it looked like she picked something up. I thought it was hers, but—" Marcus's eyes widened. He remembered the brief encounter. Could she have taken it? He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the pieces started to fit together. "Did you see where she went?" Marcus asked. "She walked toward that boutique down the street," the man replied, pointing. Marcus's stomach churned as he stood outside the boutique. He wasn't the confrontational type, but this wasn't just about money. It was about something deeply personal, something he couldn't let go. He stepped inside, scanning the store. It didn't take long to spot Linda near the back, casually chatting with a sales associate. Her confidence was almost palpable, as if she hadn't a care in the world. Marcus hesitated for a moment, his heart racing. He approached her slowly, his voice steady but firm. "Excuse me, ma'am." Linda turned, her expression instantly guarded. "Yes?" "I think you might have something that belongs to me," Marcus said, keeping his tone polite but direct. Linda's eyes narrowed slightly, and she feigned confusion. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." Marcus gestured toward her purse. "My wallet. I believe you picked it up earlier." The sales associate glanced between the two, sensing the tension. Linda's cheeks flushed slightly, but she quickly recovered. "I think you're mistaken," she said sharply, clutching her purse a little tighter. The air in the boutique grew heavy as Marcus stood his ground. "If I'm wrong, I'll apologize," he said calmly, "but I'd like you to check your bag. Please." Linda hesitated, the weight of the situation starting to sink in. Linda glared at Marcus, her hand clutching her purse tightly. "I don't have your wallet," she said, her voice laced with indignation. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to cause a scene. I just need to find my wallet. It's very important to me." The sales associate, sensing the rising tension, cautiously intervened. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her eyes darting between Linda and Marcus. Linda huffed, crossing her arms. "This man is accusing me of stealing. I have no idea what he's talking about." A small crowd of shoppers began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Marcus felt the weight of their stares, but refused to back down. "Look," he said, his voice steady but firm. "If you didn't take it, just check your bag. If it's not there, I'll apologize and leave." The murmurs from the onlookers grew louder. Linda's face turned red as she felt the scrutiny of the crowd. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, but her fingers trembled as she clutched her purse. Before Linda could walk away, the older man who had seen her earlier entered the boutique. He spotted Marcus and called out, "That's her. She's the one who picked up your wallet." The crowd turned their attention to the man, who explained what he had seen outside the cafe. "I thought she was picking up her own wallet, but now it makes sense." Linda's confidence faltered as more eyes locked on her. "You're all accusing me without proof," she shouted, her voice shaky. "This is harassment." The sales associate frowned. "Ma'am, if there's been a misunderstanding, it would help if you could just check your bag. That way, we can clear this up." Linda hesitated, her mind racing. She knew the wallet was in her bag, but admitting it now would only deepen her humiliation. Marcus felt his frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He hated being put in this position, having to prove himself in front of a crowd, feeling judged by strangers. Memories of past injustices flickered in his mind, moments when his kindness had been met with suspicion or hostility. But this wasn't just about him. This was about standing up for himself and the values he held dear. He took another deep breath, calming the storm inside him. "I'm not here to fight," he said, his voice clear and measured. "I'm just here for what's mine." His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Linda's growing agitation, and the crowd seemed to sense who was in the right. A security guard entered the boutique, alerted by the growing crowd. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone authoritative. Marcus explained the situation, keeping his explanation concise. The older man corroborated his story, while Linda continued to deny any wrongdoing. The guard turned to Linda. "Ma'am, with all due respect, it would be best to check your bag and settle this matter. If there's nothing there, you're free to go." Linda's lips trembled as she clutched her purse. She glanced around, realizing there was no escape. The crowd's expectant eyes bore into her, and the weight of her actions pressed down like a heavy stone. Finally, with shaky hands, she opened her purse. As Linda rummaged through her bag, her movements slow and deliberate, the tension in the room was palpable. When her fingers brushed against the wallet, her heart sank. She pulled it out reluctantly, holding it up for everyone to see. The crowd gasped, and whispers filled the air. Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "That's mine." He extended his hand, and Linda, her face flushed with embarrassment, placed the wallet in his palm without a word. The older man shook his head. "Shameful," he muttered, echoing the sentiment of many in the room. The security guard looked at Linda sternly. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Linda opened her mouth to protest but quickly shut it, realizing there was nothing she could say to salvage the situation. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the boutique, her head lowered to avoid the judgmental stares of the crowd. Marcus stood there for a moment, his wallet back in his hands. He opened it to check the contents, relieved to find everything still intact. "Thank you," he said, addressing the older man, the sales associate, and the security guard. The sales associate offered an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Marcus nodded. "It's all right. I appreciate everyone stepping up." As the crowd dispersed, Marcus walked out of the boutique, his steps lighter but his heart heavy with the memory of the confrontation. He couldn't help but think about the deeper issue at play, how someone's prejudice could lead to such an unnecessary situation. Linda sat alone in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her cheeks burned with humiliation, and tears welled in her eyes. She stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror, unable to recognize the person she'd become. "How did it come to this?" she muttered to herself, her voice breaking. Her mind replayed the events in the boutique, the judgmental stares, and the overwhelming shame she felt as she handed over Marcus's wallet. But beyond her embarrassment was a deeper realization. She wasn't just humiliated. She was exposed. Her actions had laid bare the prejudice and entitlement she had hidden behind for years. She thought back to Marcus's calm demeanor, the way he stood his ground without resorting to anger or insults. Despite being wronged, he had treated her with more respect than she deserved. As Marcus walked away from the boutique, he found himself at a nearby park. He sat on a bench, staring at the wallet in his hands. He opened it and pulled out the photo of his father, running his thumb over the worn edges. "You always told me to stay calm," Marcus said softly, as if speaking to his father, "to rise above. But it's not always easy." He thought about the confrontation, the way he had been forced to defend himself in front of strangers. It wasn't the first time he'd faced someone like Linda, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. But this time felt different. This time, he had stood his ground, and the truth had prevailed. Marcus took a deep breath, letting the tension in his chest ease. He wasn't just fighting for his wallet. He was fighting for his dignity, for the values his father had instilled in him. The next morning, Marcus was at his garage, working on a car, when a customer entered. He glanced up, his expression shifting from neutral to surprised. It was Linda. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, clutching a paper bag. Gone was the confident, dismissive woman he had encountered before. Her eyes were downcast, and her posture was hesitant. I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice trembling. "I wanted to apologize." Marcus straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Apologize?" Linda nodded, stepping closer. "What I did yesterday was wrong. I have no excuse for it. I don't know what came over me, but it was unacceptable. And I'm truly sorry." She placed the bag on a nearby table. "I brought you some lunch. It's not much, but it's the least I can do." Marcus studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." "I appreciate that." Linda looked up, her eyes brimming with gratitude and relief. Linda hesitated before speaking again. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but yesterday made me realize some things about myself, about the way I see people. I've been so blind, and I didn't even realize it until I saw the way you handled everything. You didn't yell or lash out. You just stood your ground." Marcus sighed, leaning against the car he was working on. "It's not always easy, but I've learned that anger doesn't solve anything. It just makes things worse." Linda nodded slowly. "I want to be better. I don't want to be the person I was yesterday." For the first time, Marcus saw a glimmer of sincerity in her eyes. He decided to meet her halfway. "It's not about being perfect. It's about learning and doing better. And it sounds like you're ready to start." Before leaving, Linda handed Marcus a folded envelope. "I also wanted to give you this," she said. Marcus opened it to find a handwritten note and a small donation to a local community program he supported. The note read, "Thank you for teaching me a lesson I didn't know I needed. I hope this helps in some small way." Marcus looked up, surprised. "You didn't have to do this." Linda shook her head. "I needed to. It's a small step, but I want to do more." As she walked away, Marcus felt a mix of emotions, relief, hope, and a sense of closure. Maybe people could change if they were willing to face their own flaws. A week after the incident, Marcus stood outside the community center where he volunteered every Saturday. He carried a box of supplies for the youth program he helped run, his wallet tucked securely in his pocket. As he walked inside, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the past week had reminded him of the strength that came from standing up for what mattered, not just for himself but for the values he wanted to pass on to the younger generation. "Hey, Mr. Marcus," one of the kids called out, running up to him. Marcus smiled, kneeling down to meet the boy at eye level. "What's up, Jamal? Are we still building that go-kart today?" Jamal asked excitedly. "Of course," Marcus replied. "Let's get to work." Meanwhile, Linda sat at her kitchen table, staring at a blank piece of paper. She had signed up for a local diversity workshop after the confrontation with Marcus, determined to address her biases and learn from her mistakes. She began to write down her thoughts. "I didn't realize how much prejudice I carried inside me until someone had the courage to confront it. I want to be better, not just for myself but for the people around me. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary." As she wrote, she thought about the day she handed Marcus the envelope. His forgiveness hadn't been immediate, but his willingness to listen had opened a door she never thought she'd walk through. Linda folded the paper and placed it in an envelope, intending to share it at her next workshop. One afternoon, Marcus was back at the cafe where the incident had begun. He sipped his coffee, glancing at the bustling street outside. The bell above the door jingled, and Marcus looked up to see Linda walk in. She hesitated for a moment before noticing him. She smiled nervously and approached his table. "Hi, Marcus. Do you mind if I sit for a moment?" Marcus gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Go ahead." Linda sat down, her hands clasped together on the table. "I just wanted to thank you again for how you handled everything that day. It made me realize a lot about myself." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And how's that going?" "I'm working on it," Linda admitted. "I've started attending workshops and volunteering at a shelter. It's not much, but it's a start." Marcus smiled faintly. "It's more than most people would do. Change takes time, but it sounds like you're on the right path." They talked for a while, not as adversaries, but as two people trying to navigate their own journeys. Linda shared her struggles, and Marcus offered insights from his own experiences. By the end of the conversation, there was a sense of mutual understanding. They weren't friends, but there was a newfound respect between them. As Linda stood to leave, she said, "If you ever need help with your community projects, let me know. I'd like to give back." Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised but impressed. "I'll keep that in mind." That evening, Marcus returned to the park where he had first realized his wallet was missing. He sat on the same bench, this time with a sense of peace. He pulled out the photo of his father and held it up to the fading sunlight. "You were right," he said quietly. "There's always room for people to change, if they're willing to try." As he placed the photo back in his wallet, he noticed a group of children playing nearby. Their laughter filled the air, a reminder of the hope and resilience that could be found even in the smallest moments. Marcus smiled, standing up and heading home, ready to face whatever challenges came next. If you enjoyed this story about redemption, self-reflection, and standing up for what's right, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. Let's spread the message of empathy and the power of personal growth.